slashing every optional Medicaid program off. The personal care attendant program that Diane worked so hard with was going to be just completely eliminated, and a number of us worked on that and getting to Governor Sandoval and saying, gee, is this really the kind of state you want? Huge cuts in the mental health budget, et cetera. And so we were looking at the biggest fight in the 25 years or so I've been doing this, going into the last session. Luckily, Governor Sandoval heard some of our concerns, restored some of those services that were to be cut, did still propose a number of deep cuts in rates that are paid to providers of services, which remains a concern today. And then, thank goodness, by the end of the session, with the help of the Supreme Court keeping the sunset taxes in place, we kind of crawled through that session and came out of it a lot better than we thought going in. And then after that, of course, we have the Affordable Care Act being passed by Congress. So another blessing looking through the session is I've been doing this work again for a lot of years, and probably our number one priority over those years is how do we get health insurance for all of those uninsured folks in Nevada as we continue to have led the parade in terms of numbers of uninsured for many years, and especially children uninsured. With the passage of the Affordable Care Act and with the governor's decision to go beyond the bare minimum and do Medicaid expansion, we have the chance to make sure that every single, with a few exceptions, individual in the state now has health insurance going forward. And that's a huge, exciting thing that we've spent thousands and thousands of hours over the years trying to get to this point. So I think we should be thankful that we're not where we were 2 years ago, and be thankful about the extremely exciting opportunities that presents to us. I think to keep it in perspective, though, we should go back a little further. I think in 2007, before the economy crashed, even then we were at the bottom of every list there is nationally in terms of the health of our children, in terms of mental health services, in terms of the amount of money spent on Medicaid, et cetera. And we were fighting then, how do we get off the bottom? And after that point, we've had 6 or 7 rounds of budget cuts where we've been cut back, and back. So my challenge to you, I guess, and concern for this session is because things are so much better than they were 2 years ago, we can't get complacent. We need to put all of this in perspective, remember where we are still at the bottom of most of those lists, and the hard work that we still have to do. It's great we've passed a few years of crisis, but moving forward, there's a lot of work to do. I don't want to get into the weeds right now, that we can in a minute, on co-pays and those kinds of things. Be glad to have that discussion. But to get yourself educated, I talked to Mike Wilden a little bit after his talk this morning. Next week, the 24th, all day in front of the joint budget committees, they will be going through all of the human services budgets. So you'll get an in-depth preview and explanation and hear the legislators' questions on what's in that budget. The only budget they won't cover that day is Department of Child and Family Services, which will be on the 30th. So before the session starts, you can be as up to speed as anybody in that building on those budgets that you care about. So you should be there. You can get a running start by the full budget being online this morning, and Mike says he will have his highlights, those things that he got in his budget and didn't, online by this afternoon.
Thanks, John. I'm really glad to have you as a resource, by the way. Next, we have Assemblywoman Teresa Benitez Thompson, who represents Assembly District 27. She's a fellow social worker and also a member of the Assembly Health and Human Service Committee.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. I'm so sorry that I missed the breakfast this morning. I didn't get out of work as soon as I wanted to, but it sounds like you gave just rewards and recognition to Mike Wilden for all the work that he did, and I know this breakfast is always a time to reward all of you folks who are out in the field as service providers who are down in the trenches, and the work that you do is just so important. So many of you we interface with professionally on different issues for our low-income communities or our senior communities. So I always value the fact that you are an active and vocal group, and we need that. I want to echo something that Mr. Sasser mentioned, because I think it's really important, which is one, we want to be grateful for the fact that our economy has grown just slightly enough to allow us to have a different type of conversation this legislative session than we did last legislative session. But I don't want that at all to give us any type of false sense of securities that we're where we need to be. A conversation you're going to see starting very early in session, I hear the first week of session, is going to be talking about Nevada's tax structure once again. And that's important because we don't want to be in the position that we were over the last couple sessions in a couple of years again. Nevada's economy is still very volatile. Our budget is very volatile. 2 years from now, we don't know where we're going to be. Maybe we're growing. Maybe we're not. Maybe it's better. Maybe it's worse. And it is so hard, I think, especially as service providers and especially as a legislator, to say, great, we can fund it for 2 years, but don't necessarily count on that money being there again in 4, because it might not be. You know, staff that you hired might have to be let go, or programs that you implement and put in place might have to be scaled back. I'm going to say this and qualify it first with the fact that during the State of the State address last night, when we went back to our legislative offices, we were supposed to have a paper copy of the budget delivered and waiting for us on our desk. And I stayed in my office until about 9:30, and it never came. And then I got word this morning, nope, you'll get it via email electronically. So I haven't had a chance to look at any of the numbers. I'm very much excited to see the highlights coming from Mr. Wilden, and we'll be watching the hearing tomorrow about what's happening with the Health and Human Service proposed budget. But this is what we know going into the State of the State, is that we've got a lot of proposed expansions. At the same time, we've got proposed tax cuts. And not that I'm necessarily against tax cuts, but we want to look at where those tax cuts are coming from, and then where proposed revenue is also coming from. The governor's proposing cutting back the modified business tax, which in our first estimates looks like it'll be a tax break for about 2,700 different types of businesses, but offsetting that with an increase in the sales tax, which we know is more of a regressive tax and hits hardest on our low income and middle class families. And we want to think about the fact that, is this the way that we want to build our budget? Once again, with taking less responsibility off of our business community and putting more responsibility, more burdens on the back of our low income and middle class families. You know, is that necessarily going to set us up for stability down the road? Or, you know, if things get tight again and income becomes more discretionary, do we see a big drop in our budget because, you know, that sales tax is way down again? So I really want to see this conversation about building a more stable budget, a more predictable budget in place. Other states have mastered this. It's not necessarily rocket scientists. I'm a social worker. I don't do math, but I know that we can figure this out. So I really hope that we have that serious conversation, because it would just be heartbreaking for me to go back as a legislator and have to make the kind of cuts that we did last session. I sat in my office a couple different times and thought, oh my goodness, is this why I'm here, to push a green button and vote yes for this kind of budget? Am I voting yes for these mental health cuts in rural areas? Am I doing this? I can't believe this is what I got elected to do, and I don't want to be in that position again. And hopefully a conversation about a better tax structure will get us to a more stable place. Let's see, other than that, I was very excited to hear about expansions in funding to community and home-based waivers. We were excited to hear that the governor had included what we had on our Democratic side been talking about for a while, which is funding for English language learners. I think the preliminary numbers on that are about $14 million. We think that might get something going, but that's less than $1 million per county. And as was cited in the governor's State of the State last night, Clark County alone has more than 50,000 English language learner students. So we want to make sure that if we're saying that we're going to make a commitment to English language learners, that we're going to fund it in a way that's more than just getting half a program in place. And I think that's all that I have to say.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson. Much appreciated. Now is the portion that we open up to the audience, and you decide where this conversation goes from this point. Keep in mind HSN's 3 priorities for this legislative session, which is healthcare, mental health, and employment. And as I said before, if you have other questions related to your clients and to our community, that is acceptable as well. So who has questions?
Hey, Stacy, you have the microphone.
You know, I'll leave
Here.
Hello.
Good morning. My name is Louise Sutherland, and I am past coordinator for the Nevada Mental Health Counseling Association. Nevada's mental health population is currently direly underserved. As the numbers of individuals, families, and couples who will be added to the Nevada Medicaid rolls increases, what measures does the legislature see itself taking in order to be able to expand the number of mental health providers in this state? We are, as I said, Nevada is incredibly underserved at the moment. Nevada has the second highest suicide rate in the country. And Nevada, the National Association of the Mentally Ill has given Nevada a D- in its ability to tend to the mental health needs of Nevada. So what measures do you see yourselves taking in order to remedy this problem?
I can't figure out the on button on this microphone. Do you want to direct that to any specific panelist, or would you like everyone to take a short little stab?
Everyone take a step at it. Please.
Why don't you start over there?
We'll go along.
Once again, I think a lot of this depends on knowing the details of the budget, which we're all going to hopefully be looking at here real quick. One thing that I heard that I liked last night was the funding of a 24-hour mental health facility operating in Southern Nevada, so great for Southern Nevada. I kind of view that as like a little pilot project, and I hope it's funded correctly so that, as I imagine a 24-hour mental health facility would actually run and operate. That does nothing for our roles. It still leaves us with the big issue of addressing service providers, and I think that's going to be a big theme overall with the Medicaid expansion. You folks know as much as I do, just because a person has Medicaid doesn't necessarily mean that they have the access to care that the rest of us have. I have a patient who's Medicaid and needs got a referral to a cardiologist, but finding a cardiologist who takes Medicaid up in Northern Nevada is really hard. We haven't found one yet. And so I think it's an ongoing question of not only with the Medicaid expansion, but in all areas, including mental health, what we do to get service providers in place. The rates, the reimbursement rates are a big part of that. And then I think also just growing the pool of service providers. We know that we're in desperate need of physicians. We know that we're in desperate need of all different types of professionals that our clients utilize. We can't get enough social workers, but then also mental health people, psychiatrists, and all of the assortment of folks that we rely on to help these folks. And it's